And welcome back. Our first conversation of the morning, as Marlene alluded to prior to the commercial break, is a discussion with the Chief Executive Officer of the Port of Belize Limited. We have been joined on set by CEO Andy Lane for PBL. Good morning, Mr. Lane.
Good morning.
Let's look first of all at the overall picture involving the Port of Belize Limited and the effect or the impact of the pandemic situation on import and export at the facility.
Yeah, the port is not necessarily materially different to many other businesses in the country. So, you know, with the decrease in tourists, with the lockdowns and the slowdowns generally in the economy, then in 2020 we lost 1/5 of our container volumes, right? At the same time, our sugar exports declined by 50%, and then suddenly the cruise ships stopped in totality, right? So that was I think statistically that was a 97 or a 94% loss that we had in 2020. 2021, you know, we've seen a little bit of recovery, but my volume and therefore my revenue is still 13% below 2019. We have one cruise ship a week instead of 2 or 3 per day, and my sugar is still very low. It's still 50% of 2019. So we've had a pretty huge hit to our revenue stream, and that's caused a major problem to the bottom line, and we need to manage that the best we possibly can.
Mm-hmm. How do you go about perhaps systematically addressing each one of these issues? I know that some things are beyond the control of the port itself. For instance, the return of cruise ship to its optimal is beyond the control of PBL. But in terms of the other areas, how do you put together some kind of a plan or strategy to be able to ensure that you're meeting your targets?
Yes, you're quite right. I mean, our revenue stream is not something that we necessarily have direct control over. And another thing to remember about our revenue stream is that we work with a tariff which dates back to the early 1980s. So there has been no increase in unit revenues in nearly 40 years since the port began. So without the unit revenues increasing, and we can't just push up the unit revenues either, because that simply just makes the price for consumers for imported goods more expensive. It makes Belizean exports less attractive in the world. So the only thing we can really focus on is our cost, and our cost is king for us right now, and we need to make every effort that we can. So in 2020, we unfortunately had to say goodbye to 34 staff. Our original idea was more in line with what the government thinks of today in terms of reducing staff wages by 10%. That was wholeheartedly rejected by the union, and the only alternative we had was to say goodbye to some very good people, and that hurt a lot. It hurt the people, it hurt the company, it hurt the remaining employees. But it was a situation that we were essentially forced into. You know, we have to make sure that the business is sustainable.
It's a situation that many businesses find themselves in, having to decide how to be sustainable while maintaining staff. And many did go the route of wage cuts. But I want to step back just for a moment, if you'd allow me, to talk a bit about the point at which you entered as CEO of the Port of Belize Limited. It's only been a few months, and my question is, having known the landscape of the challenges, and not just COVID-19, but the ongoing disputes that you've had to face with the union, what were some of your strategic ideas stepping in as to how you felt it could be resolved?
Yes, so we need to go back to my predecessor, Mr. Pablo Salinas, who's actually also a personal friend of 20 years. He probably came in at the most difficult time, and he did a lot of very good rough tuning. He made a lot of process amendments. He restructured the organization, and he set us on the right track. When I came in, it was more about refining what Pablo had been doing in his short time. He was CEO for only 18 months, right? So What I'm looking at is structuring performance management. We were in dire need of having a mission and a vision and some organizational values. We have a lot of potential in our leadership team, but the skills need to be further refined, and we need to lead people better. We need to create a much nicer working environment for our employees, and these are all of the things that we've been working on since I've been here, as well as digitalization and process improvements. This year so far, our productivity on container ships is 14% above last year. So we're doing absolutely fantastically. And this is, I can only say thanks to my staff, to my stevedores for the great efforts and achievements that they've made in getting to that result.
Yeah. The efficiency at the port is absolutely crucial for the country, not just for the port and the workers or the direct customers. It's how we're going to keep business going, and at a rapid pace as well. The digitization that took place previously, and now what you're talking about with better workflow management, is one step. But there still is really your elephant in the middle of the room, is being able to work out relations with the unions on now the CBA for staff. Let's dive into that issue.
Sure, yes. So believe it or not, the existing CBA for our staff was created in 2002, when we lived in a very different world. That was even before the global financial crisis, right? And essentially that took us through to 2006. And the thing with the CBA is that it never expires until it's replaced with a new CBA. And in the past, there's been various attempts to renew and modernize that CBA. And that's something which now I've picked up again. And it's something which we will have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of this week. We will have deep discussions with our union in the presence of the Labour Commissioner and the Labour Minister, and we will try to make some progress on this, because the existing one it's somewhat outdated. Despite the fact that it has expired, we've continued to honour that.
It's rolled over.
Yeah, we've continued to honour that as per the 2002 agreements, and we will continue to honour that as well. But it does need to get modernised and get refreshed. So hopefully we can make some good progress this week on that.
How do you maneuver in an environment where, for as long as we have been covering the news, there has been tension between the management and the ownership of the Port of Belize Limited and the stevedores? There have been several people who have been at the helm over the past few years, and this issue remains a perennial one. How do you, as a fairly new CEO, come in and be able to maneuver those rough tides?
Yeah, first of all, I think there's some misperceptions relating to the stevedores. We have around about 160 stevedores, and 99% of these guys, they are hard workers, they work in a harsh environment, they do a dangerous job, and they do it extremely well, right? The vast majority of our stevedores, they want to come to work, they want to earn their money, they want to go home and be with their families. Unfortunately, in any group of people, there is maybe just a handful that don't necessarily see it that way. And unfortunately, the union has maybe not best managed the expectations and the behavior of that very small element, right? And that's where the tensions come from. So next week we will be talking with the union about the stevedore issues, and again, I hope that we can make some progress there, and I hope that we can get an agreement in place and where we can stop all of this tension and this friction, because it's not good for my employees, the stevedores. They're left with a great deal of uncertainty for the future. I can understand how that impacts them and their families, and we need to get to a better place where, now that we know, it was only since last week or the week before that we knew for sure that an element of our business was moving away. Now we know what we need to deal with going forward. We have our eyes open, and now we can start to talk about, how do we best proceed.
Well, I want to get into the sugar issue. That's a critical issue here. But before we do, the last year, it was a historic moment where the CBA was able to be signed with the Christian Workers Union and the port when it came to the stevedores. The current CBA on the table is regarding staff. Now, the accusation that was being made by the Christian Workers Union is that the PBL was non-responsive or slow to respond to their requests for meetings, which is part of the reason why they initiated their Go Slow. How do you respond to that?
I have a very different take on that. So from the day that I took over as the CEO, which was the 27th of March, and until the 21st of April, we were engaged in discussions with the union. Mm-hmm. The union left that table. From the 21st of April to the 28th of May, I have sent at least 5 requests for us to continue the discussions on the secondary substitutes agreement that was outstanding after the main CBA was implemented last August for the stevedores. All of those requests were ignored, but on the 28th, so that was 5 weeks, so on the 28th of May, the union decided rather than talking to PBL, they would instead talk to the Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. So they sent a letter, they sent an MOU, and they sent a load of other documents to the Prime Minister, turning the attention now around to the sugar. Now, unfortunately, that has sat with the government. I'm not going to say with the Prime Minister, but that has sat with the government for 7 or 8 weeks. And the response that came back, I don't think it was befitting of the issue which is actually on the table. And I can fully understand the Christian Workers Union feeling let down by the government here. They have unfortunately had to hear, they had to hear from me on March the 30th that there was a big risk that the sugar was leaving. They've had to hear from me again last week that the decision has been made that the MOU will not be respected, which I find disappointing, for want of a better word. And I understand their issues and I understand their frustration. However, it's not us that has not been willing to talk. It is essentially the union that has not been willing to talk. And as early as July the 8th, when these matters were still outstanding, there was an orchestrated, deliberate slowdown on the sugar. And this has resulted in quite significant issues for our stevedores, for our employees. That for me was unnecessary, that was premature, it was irresponsible, and it shouldn't have happened.
And there's a direct impact and cost.
Yes, exactly. And you know, if we're to be a sustainable business, we need to deliver a service that that adds value to our customers. Mm-hmm. And preventing the loading of sugar at a sensible speed, and this is happening at a time when the government is deliberating, you know, shall we honour the MOU, shall we not honour the MOU? We haven't really given the government a great deal of confidence in our ability to be the port of choice for sugar exports, right? So the timing was so inappropriate. It was a rash decision. I mean, it seems sometimes like the union's horizon is no later than around about lunchtime, right? And we have to look at our business from a long-term sustainable platform for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
This issue plays out publicly. And there are several different things on the table right now, and I want to I want to ask you if the ongoing conversation for the CBA with the staff is one issue. The question about redundancy for sugar is a part of that. And then there's also the conversation that takes place on the MOU, which is a decision that's made by government. Do you feel that the decision around the sugar and the consequences of this decision have kind of overshadowed and become intermingled with the CBA discussion?
This is very much what the union likes to do, is it likes to intermingle and mix different issues. You know, it's a little catchphrase maybe. The union is very fast to get things started. It's not so effective at actually getting things closed. And what we have said from the get-go, from before I came here, is that we take one issue at a time, we discuss it to its conclusion, we get it done, we get it finished, we get it implemented, we don't half-bake it, and then we move on to the next issue, and then we move on to the next issue, and that's the only way that we can get things sorted out. Entering into last week with the knowledge that, with the 100% knowledge that the sugar will not be in PBL next year, but it will be in Big Creek, now we know for the first time exactly what it is we need to discuss. And I think we had a very good meeting with the union last week where we have agreed timelines and a roadmap for how we will discuss all of these various different issues. And PBL wants these issues resolved. We don't want to have uncertainty in our business. It's very, very difficult for us to strategize and drive the business in the right way when we have all of these things outstanding. So I sincerely hope in the week or two ahead that we can get these matters resolved and in an amicable way.
What are some of the sticking points when it comes to the collective bargaining agreement with the staff that you're finding challenges in getting a resolution to?
You know, the staff CBA it's a fascinating subject because, you know, I'm a highly engaging leader and I have some highly engaging managers, and we speak to our staff on a hourly basis, right? I don't get a sense that my staff are particularly disappointed. Yeah, they have some frustrations, that always exists. Would they like to have this thing resolved? Yes, they would. But I don't get a burning platform sense from my staff. What I sense from my staff is that they're probably more concerned about their long-term future and the retention of their jobs than they are about a few little benefits in the CBA. It's knowing what the future will bring and knowing that they can provide for their families. That, for me, based on my interactions with my staff, that's what I'm hearing as the most important thing. But that's not what's being communicated to us by their representatives. So how well is the union representing the true voice of my staff, of my employees?
Well, you have no choice but to work with the union representative.
No, absolutely, and we recognize that the Christian Workers Union is the sole party for bargaining backwards and forwards. No problems with that at all. But I would very much prefer a starting point where we had issues on the table which are the real issues that the staff are facing, and not some things which have been concocted in a dark room somewhere in Belize City, right? And that, for me at least, that seems to be the case. So if you talk about the sticking points, then, and you know, it's always the same in these discussions, so they would like to have pay rises. They would like to have greater severance packages. They would like to have retrospective bonuses. Everything is about money, 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 money. But my staff are not craving for money. They're craving for security. They're craving for progress. They're craving for a better working environment. And these are all of the things that I've been spending my time on because I know that that's more important to my staff than a number of cents in a payslip.
Let's go back a bit. We're looking at sugar as one of the mainstays. It's perhaps one of the significant contracts that you guys have as the port. With the operations for shipment now moving to Big Creek, how does this impact, or how do you plan to fill the void left in the wake of the movement of this particular operation that you guys are undertaking at the port?
The sugar is going to be a big loss, and I wish it was staying, but I also appreciate and I accept that BSI needs to provide a logistics service which is the most efficient for itself and which ensures that the farmers are able to keep as much of the profits as they need. I fully get that, I fully understand that. I have no ill feelings towards BSI. BSI still remain a large customer of mine, and it remains our intention to satisfy that customer's requirements. Now, I'm a shipping guy, I'm a shipping consultant before being a CEO. I know the price of door-to-door logistics, you know, from origin in Tower Mill to discharge in Europe or in the US. And the calculations that I've made are very similar to the numbers that BSI has, in that, you know, we're talking very, very, very marginal gains for BSI and the farmers by moving to Big Creek. Yes, the ships turn faster because they have an automated loading system. They can load 4,000 tons a day, and we can load, I won't put a number on it, but something significantly less. And that makes a major difference. You know, ships these days are incredibly expensive things to charter, right? They don't have the stevedoring expenses that we have, but that's offset by the cost of additional land transportation, which is much more expensive than bringing the sugar by barge down into Port of Belize. Now, the number that the Prime Minister gave me, and a number which resonates reasonably well with me, and I don't think that BSI would argue against it, is that, you know, we could be talking about something like $2 Belizean per metric ton is the cost advantage of Big Creek. But what we maybe haven't considered is the 4,000 or 5,000 tons of additional CO2 that's going to be emitted by trucking rather than barging. We haven't factored in the damage to the roads. We haven't factored in highway safety. We haven't factored in noise pollution and pollution to rural communities as these 35-ton trucks tear through their villages at 25 or 35 miles per hour, right? All of those things have not really been considered. So if you were to put numbers on those things, then that $2 Belizean is probably eaten up. So for the overall, if you talk about it from a country perspective, it's not necessarily the best. Then if you look at it in a different way, our stevedores are contracted to work 12-hour shifts on the sugar. And in a 12-hour shift, each gang, a gang has 10 men, each gang is able to handle 3 barges. How do we know this? Because it's happened in the past. If you pay them double time, they will do 2 barges. If you pay them single time, they will only capable of doing 1 barge. So this whole arrangement that's developed
over... So the productivity changes.
This has been brewing for 16 years, right? 2005, Port of Belize handled its first sugar. And even in the early days, there were go-slows, there was trickery being played. The game is very, very simple. If you want more than 1 barge performed by 1 gang in a 12-hour shift, and the barge brings 110 tons, then you need to pay extra. Previously, at least during my time here, BSI has agreed to do double time payments for 2 barges per gang per ship. So if we're working 3 cranes, that means we can handle 6 barges, 660 tons in a 12-hour shift, or 1,320 tons in a 24-hour period. And when we're able to do that, if we can do that consistently without interruption, then our product is lower cost than the product that Big Creek can offer. The problem is the consistency and the erraticness of what happens. So when the wind changes direction and suddenly the slowdown happens, then of course we tilt the scales. And this is, I think this is what BSI really can't continue to accept is the behavioral element.
And that's what I was going to ask. In a 12-hour shift, if I am the consumer, I expect a certain amount of work to be done within that 12 hours. What you're saying is that fluctuates based on how much the manual labor is able to complete and based on their own individual incentives.
The manual labor is not the problem. Again, 99% of these guys, we put them on a ship, they leave their family for 12 hours. What they want is to maximize their earnings. If they can go home at the end of that shift safely, with double time in their pocket, and each man has worked 2 barges, everybody's happy. They're happy, we're happy, the customer's happy. Unfortunately, other forces bully and intimidate my good stevedores into working slower, because they seem to feel that this is in their long-term interests. And now quite clearly with the sugar leaving, everybody has lost.
I want to continue. I mean, there's a lot more to unpack there. So we're going to take a very quick break, and when we come back, we'll dive into this topic a bit more and understand what happens from here, whether you will re-engage with government, whether the situation is salvageable, but we'll talk about those after this very short commercial break. So please stay tuned.
Thank you.
It's time to put your TVs on lockdown. COVID won't stop us this time. After a year of waiting, Summerfest is back, pandemic style. If you're under the age of 18 and you think you have the talent, we are looking for you. Submit videos to us on Facebook, Instagram, and email. Or join us here at Channel 5 on Coney Drive to audition from July 26th to 30th from 10 a.m. to midday. Be a part of Summerfest 2021 and show Belize your talent.
And welcome back. We'll continue our conversation this morning with PBL CEO Andy Lane as we discuss all things that are happening at the Port of Belize Limited. Our conversation prior to the commercial break was the issue of the departure of sugar from PBL to Big Creek, and we were discussing what the impact of that will be on PBL and the opportunities that perhaps will arise in terms of you seeking new business and what have you to fill that void. Let's go back a bit. You've mentioned that there's ongoing discussions with the Christian Workers Union in terms of trying to resolve this issue. What happens in the interim? Because the operations perhaps are sort of delayed or slowed down in terms of being able to deliver on certain targets. What happens between now and the time perhaps where this matter is resolved?
We have to maintain continuity of the business for the business which remains, right? I mean, we've seen, we have a very recent, a very live example of what happens to our business and what happens to our employees if we have irrational and erratic behavior, right? So if we keep on doing the same thing and expect a different result, then I don't think we're necessarily doing our cognitive ability too much justice, right? So we have to continue. I mean, as I mentioned before, the performance on the container operation is the best that it's ever been. We're doing fantastically well. Yeah, the volumes are a little bit down, but we're turning ships as quickly as we can. We have one chink in our armor, and that's the agreement that we have in terms of working hours, which defies all logic. But it is what it is. It's in the CBA, and we have to work with that. But I think generally, I mean, the feedback that I get from our container customers is that they're generally reasonably happy with the service that we produce. Could it be better? Yes, of course it could. Will we make it better? Yes, we will. That's our aim, to continually raise the bar in terms of the product that we offer to our customers. I'm just launching our mission, vision, values, and our vision is that we are the port of choice for Belizean shippers, right? That's our vision. And we can't demand that our customers like us. The only way that we can get our customers to like us is to provide a level of service that delights them, that meets or exceeds their expectations. And so long as we can do that, we will have a viable business. We will retain the customers, we will be able to retain the employees, and everything will be generally quite good. So that's very positive. The sugar is not the mainstay of my business. Let's just put that out there. The sugar is maybe 10 or 15% of the total business of the Port of Belize. We also have some wheat and we have some fertilizer. It's relatively modest in its volumes, but it's really the containers where the Port of Belize this is our main act.
But while it's only 10 to 15% of the overall business for Port of Belize, for the stevedores, it's one of their main income earners.
Well, here's the thing, and we speak with facts from the Port of Belize, and that's not necessarily what you always hear in the news. So as recently as last week, we have heard that the stevedores are going to lose 50% of their income. Not true. Not true. If you take our regular stevedores, they are earning 75% of their annual earnings come from containers, and the balance comes from the sugar operations. So yes.
Regular versus, what's the other?
Well, we have 3 levels of stevedores. So we have our regular fixed ganged stevedores, and then we have some substitutes if those are not available, and then we have some secondary substitutes if the substitutes are not available. And as time has gone,
And none of them are losing as much as 50%.
some of the secondary substitutes, they have very little, if not no, opportunities to work on sugar. To work on containers. So for those guys, yes, there's a lot of their earnings are being lost. Because it's only in the sugar season when they get to earn any business, right? But for the regular stevedores and for the substitute stevedores, it's a significantly less number. And the secondary substitutes, they're not covered by the existing CBA. These guys are also called trailers. I mean, they're still employees, they're still paid by PBL, but they're not having any contracts. They are essentially casual workers.
They're like temps, they fill in when the others aren't available.
Precisely, and I think the majority of them, they're working in many different areas as well. So they're not only, I mean, the regular stevedores are probably working the majority of their time with the PBL, but the secondary substitutes, they're doing all sorts of other work as well.
You spoke of the mission for the port and looking at the service that you want to provide. When we're talking about the sugar, you're talking about, again, several entities. You have Port of Belize, the stevedores, and what they are obligated to be able to provide to PBL based on the CBA. There is the relationship that you have with your customer, the sugar industry, and then they also have a relationship with the cane farmers as well. And throw into that mix the Big Creek port, which had a memorandum of understanding with the government of Belize saying that they would not essentially take business away from the Belize City port. So all of these factors are at play, and now what has taken place as of last week is that the government, and I know the Prime Minister has gone on record to say it, that the agreement isn't legally binding. And in fact, the cane farmers are the ones who essentially pay the ultimate price when there is a delay at the Port of Belize for whatever reason is taking place there.
The farmers take 65% of the total logistics costs. So whenever there's an increase in logistics costs, whenever there's a delay, 65% of that goes to the farmers. And for the recent shipment, which was aborted in Port of Belize due to the extreme slowdown. I mean, here I'm talking an extreme slowdown where in some 12-hour periods we loaded 50 tons, right? Not 600 tons. So
it was almost a 10-day delay, you said?
Yes. So to put a cost on that, just simply in terms of the cost of the ship, not to mention any other associated costs, that means that the farmers now pick up a bill of $20 Belizean per ton of sugar. And that's $20 Belizean on top of an end-to-end supply chain cost of about 180, 190. So it's a significant hit for the farmers.
And you can understand that when the government looks at the agreement and whether or not they should allow for the sugar to be moved to the Big Creek port, when these are the numbers that the cane farmers, the men who go out and do a lot of all the manual labor, why they would be inclined to go for a more efficient service.
I think it's difficult to blame the cane farmers. It's difficult to blame BSI, ASR for the decisions that they've taken, right? And again, as I mentioned before, this is the consequence of irrational, illogical behavior, right? And we've seen this the world over. I mean, you take the port of Portland in Oregon in the US. In 2015, the slowdown and the performance of the business essentially the port was closed. It was shut down, and it was shut down for 4 years, right? Just because of ridiculous behavior, and everybody loses. The stevedores, the longshoremen, they lose, the community loses, everybody loses when that happens. And these are the situations we need to avoid.
Yeah. I think you said in your press conference that it's equally as important to you as Port of Belize, as the stevedores, to maintain the business relationship with ASR BSI.
Yes. They're still a big exporter, right? I mean, the direction of BSI is that they want to export more refined sugar than raw sugar. And the refined sugar is exported in containers, and they are happy at the moment with our container service. And as we see more and more sugar being refined and value added in Belize, the numbers, I think they're going to move from 1/3 refined to 2/3 refined. That will be a big boost for our export container business, and that's very much appreciated. And we are 110% committed to providing a good service for those container exports.
Now the question is though, where do you go from here?
Well, we need to take these discussions and we need to get these agreements into place. And it needs to be done, you know, if there are reasonable requests. A reasonable request is very different to a completely unreasonable, ridiculous demand, right? So if somebody wants to knock on my door and says, hey, Mr. Lane, you know, can you give me $1 million and I'm going to give you nothing back in return, that's unrealistic. If we can have sensible discussions about how can we make things better for our employees whilst ensuring that the business remains competitive, those are the discussions that we want to have and we can have. So we will get into those discussions starting on Wednesday with the staff CBA, and we will continue discussions next week in relation to the stevedores and the sugar redundancy. Just to get onto that, you know, the word redundancy.
I was going to say, so PBL has to pay redundancy to stevedores who will no longer be collecting that portion based on sugar.
Well, the thing is, redundancy means that you leave employment and you get compensated or severed from that employment.
Because you're no longer needed.
We're not severing the employment of anybody. So there is no redundancy.
You can imagine that this is not going to be a position that is accepted by the stevedores.
I've spoken with some of the stevedores. It was a little bit of an emotional and heated discussion, but I asked several of the stevedores, you know, if you talk about redundancy, how many of you would like to sever your employment with the Port of Belize and then take your redundancy payment? Because if people come forward and ask for voluntary redundancy, then, you know, maybe we would consider that. We have a lot of stevedores. We have a lot of reserve and stevedores waiting, or we have a lot of people waiting to become stevedores. So we can have those discussions, but the stevedores do not want to be made redundant. They want to continue working with the Port of Belize.
I was just about to say, because in all our years of dealing with stevedores and the discussion surrounding their line of work, regardless of what the outcome is, nobody is willing to let go to say, well, I will voluntarily walk away from this line of work. So it's almost as if though those who are waiting in line to become stevedores won't be doing so anytime soon, because the ones that are in place are there firmly put.
That's very correct. And yeah,
because it's a high earning job?
It depends on how you look at it. I mean, there was a figure put out last week by the union that suggested stevedores earn $35,000 Belizean dollars per year. I think that's an inflated number. I think it's closer to 30. But if you look at the Social Security Board statistics, then somebody who earns $30,000 a year is in the top quartile, in the top 25% of wage earners out of the 110,000 registered Belizean workers with the Social Security Board. If you look at it, so that's one way to look at it. If you look at it in terms of hourly pay, And if you look at it only in terms of hourly pay on containers, and these numbers might shock you, the average stevedore, the average, right? This is not talking about individual stevedores, individual gangs. The average stevedore works 5 hours per week on average. This means that the average stevedore has twice the hourly pay of a minister before the minister takes a 10% pay cut, and assuming that a minister only works 39.5 hours a week, which we know is not true. So, depending on how you look at it, right, there's I only speak with numbers and facts. Of course, numbers and facts alone, it's also about interpreting those numbers and facts, right? And I don't want to dramatize or emotionalize anything here, but...
And I just want to counter with the justification that is typically given as to why it's a high-earning job, because of the risks associated with it as well.
It's a strenuous job. It's a hard job. It's dexterous. And these men have to be very strong, and they have to be very fit. In terms of dangerous, it's only dangerous if the company or the foreman or the stevedores do not follow our very, very clear safety standards. Basically, these guys are manhandling 30-ton containers to and from the ship, right? And there are ways that you can do that to mitigate the risk. We have had, year to date, we have had 3 accidents where stevedores have been injured in the container operation. And each and every one of those accidents was preventable and avoidable if the safety protocols are being followed. So on the 28th of April this year, on World Safety Day, we had a large campaign. We reminded everybody of how do we work safely and how do we protect ourselves and our colleagues from danger. When I came here in the back end of March, there were stevedores with no helmets, with no safety vests. That's not the case today. They're all wearing helmets, they're all wearing safety vests. We're kitting them out with shoes, we're getting them raincoats. We will provide all of the equipment that they need to keep them safe, to keep them dry, to keep them healthy at work. And so long as they follow all of the existing protocols, we mitigate the risk of what is, without protocols, I agree, a very dangerous occupation.
Now, and the bigger issue is there is a CBA in place that outlines how the PBL works with the stevedores. And you've spoken of the 12-hour shifts and basically how productivity changes, how much they output at the end of the day in their performance is based on what they're collecting. How do you mitigate this? Because from a consumer standpoint, it's either going to cost me more in time or money to get the job done, especially in a world where people are moving towards automation.
The 12-hour shift is specifically relevant to the sugar. Basically, what happens with our container ships, and this is something that I particularly dislike because it's illogical and it creates, it puts us in an uncompetitive position from the get-go. But the union, when the CBA was being negotiated, pushed and refused against all common logic arguments to allow a different setup on the container operation. So the setup is a ship comes in and it's worked by one gang. Now previously we would work a maximum of 12 hours because that was compliant with the labor laws of Belize, and then one gang would complete, another gang would come in and continue the operation. Those laws were changed so that it's now legal to work 15 hours, and this is dexterous manual, this labor. Is physically and mentally draining work, and 12 hours is already a long period. What's then happened is that we have one ship and it's one gang. So if that ship does not complete in 15 hours, that gang goes home and takes its mandatory 9 hours of rest, and the ship sits there for 9 hours doing nothing until that gang returns back to work. That's grossly inefficient. This is something which does not happen in any other port anywhere on this planet. It was something which, despite all of the arguments last year for this not to happen, the union just kept on dismissing it. And they talked about, you know, it's about the stevedore gangs don't want to leave work for other gangs to complete. It's almost like the gangs compete with each other. If you look at year to date, and if you look at how many containers have been handled per gang, you would then expect it to be fairly even. That's not the case. Some gangs have handled 15 or 20% more than the average, and some have handled 12 or 13% less than the average. And there's a huge disparity between the number of containers and the number of hours each gang is working and the income that the stevedores are getting.
What creates that disparity?
It's just simply this thing about, you know, we have to work one gang, one ship so that everybody gets equal income. It is not delivering what it was designed to deliver. It is not fit for purpose. It is not helping the stevedores. It's not ticking a single box. And it's absolutely not helping our customers with the efficiency of their shipping logistics.
And this existing move of the sugar to Big Creek Port is kind of the end result of what this type of inefficiency for so long.
Well, the sugar is due to 16 years of constant slowdowns, right? That's why the sugar is going. The containers is a very, I mean, the two operations are materially very, very different. But on the containers now, you know, if the containers was always the mainstay of my business and the sugar was almost like a secondary gig, now that the sugar is no longer there, it becomes all that much more important that our container product gets better and better and better. So that's what we need to work towards.
Now, the question, you know, I think in the response by the Prime Minister to the media in looking at the decision by government, one was looking at the impact on cane farmers, which have been feeling the impact for so long and never really discussed. So that's one. Second is looking at the industry itself. Delays for the industry comes at a cost as well, and in a time where we're trying to earn more from more exports. But then the other issue is looking at convenience and being able to put in the investment in modernizing the services as well. How do you respond to that?
Yes. So I mean, our operation as it stands today is 40 years old. So when that was set up, you know, with an 800-meter long trestle and a pierhead in the middle of the sea, and a 70-meter berth, that was very appropriate in 1980. It's less relevant in 2021, and we recognize this. The owners of our organization are prepared to invest. The statement from the Prime Minister on Thursday of last week talked about a reluctance to invest. That is false. That is not true. There has been a proposal for modernization and expansion of the Port of Belize on the table for over 1 year, and it has not yet been approved. On Friday, we put yet another environmental assessment impact up for public notification for review. And there's a 2-week process running now where the public can have a look at how we intend to develop this port in a sustainable way. But the money is available for modernizing the ports, and the minute that we have approval, the modernization will commence. And we very much look forward to that. So it's not that we're not prepared to invest. That's completely false.
Now, you understand that publicly, as this has played out year after year after year, it is seen that the institution is essentially taking advantage of the small group of workers. And we have heard the cries, we've seen the protests, we've seen where it reaches the point of, escalates to the point of violence. How do you explain, or how do you respond to the fact that people feel that for some reason there is a move to be able to take advantage of the stevedores?
Again, I think that this is emotionally fueled, and it's being done in a very irresponsible way. We have a group of men who want to work. They work very hard, and they are paid, let's call it, a not unreasonable income for the work that they do, right? The compensation that they get is not too bad. It's not fantastic, but it's not too bad. These poor guys, my employees, seem to be used as pawns in a different story, and a story which I don't really understand, a story which doesn't really seem to have an objective. They're manipulated and used as pawns by the union for some other agenda, and what that other agenda is, I really don't know. And you just can look at history to see that there's only one modus of operandi with this union, is that they concoct issues, they emotionalize and dramatize those issues, they incite the violence that you talk about. They come with these concocted issues, making ridiculous demands, and the consequence of us not bowing to their demands is that they'll shut the port down and try and burn it. And this repeats and repeats and repeats itself time and time again. I'm not sure how that can even be considered to be legal activity. I mean, inciting violence, that's surely a criminal offense. And that, for me, is what's happening here.
This has happened in the past, where we've seen a level of violence escalating out of failed discussions. The most recent one that I could recall was an incident, I believe, in last year, where the gang suppression unit was essentially unleashed on members of the union who are employed as stevedores. How do you attempt as best as possible to prevent a recurrence such as this? Because it would seem as though whenever there is a breakdown in discussion, then it becomes an issue where, okay, like you said, we'll burn tires, we'll try to shut the place down and cease operations. Mm-hmm. How do you prevent that from happening in terms of negotiating with people who are rather difficult and firm in their position?
We will enter into these negotiations in good faith. We're looking for solutions, we're not looking for problems, right? Mm-hmm. The union wants to create the problems, and we want to solve the problems that have been created. Mm-hmm. And some of those problems might be real, and some of them might be artificial, and there's a whole, as you mentioned before, the complexity, yes, mm-hmm. There's a lot of complexity involved here. I don't want to get into the details of how this might be resolved. Our stance historically has been that we deal with our employees, we deal with the unions, and we do that in a room, and we do it between ourselves. I'm only here today to try and correct some of the falsehoods that are circulating in the media, mm-hmm. because the union prefers to have the media pantomime running, and essentially, they realize that what they're asking for is unrealistic, and they will then try to get those unrealistic demands through inciting violence and threats, but they're also very effective at trying to get support from the community. So I'm here today to talk about facts, to try and put a different narrative on the table in terms of how are things really. We have some ideas as to how we can solve all of these issues. This is the staff CBA, this is the stevedores and the sugar, and this is also about the secondary substitutes and promotional plans, and there's a lot of things on the go here. We have solutions for each and every one of those, and we believe that those are pragmatic solutions. Those are solutions that ensure that our company remains sustainable. That means we don't need in the future to go and sever more employees from their employment, right? Mm-hmm. And we believe that it's right for the employees, and we believe that this will add value to our employees. So at the end of all of this, we believe that we can be in a position where we can move sustainably forward in a peaceful environment, continuing to improve our service, continuing to add value to the country as an essential service.
And while you are a private business, my question is, what's your communication or with the private sector at this point? What is missing in this conversation as well is how important efficiency at the port is for businesses across this country.
I mean, right now, one thing that I instigated here is something called a focus vessel approach. So with one specific customer, every single week we have a pre-operational meeting, we have a post-operational, post-mortem. We look at their processes, we look at our processes and how do they interface and how do they interact. We learn from data and from very, very detailed data and statistics, you know, what's actually happening in our operation. This takes a huge amount of effort, and the particular customer who's engaged with us on this is doing a fantastic job. I mean, they're also looking to change their processes, and we're looking to find mutual ways of getting greater efficiency. The reason we do it only on one service is because it's very, very time consuming to do. The thing is, what we learn on one particular service, it can be replicated to all of the other services that we have and to all of the other customers. So I would like to think that we have a good, honest, productive business relationship with our direct customers. We're maybe a little detached from our indirect customers, but that's something we can also work on in the future. If you think about those specifically being the importers, the exporters, the truckers who don't have contracts and commercial agreements with us. But what we have managed to achieve this year is we've reduced the average time that an external truck spends in our facility from 60 minutes to 40 minutes. And that's just again through raising awareness, through measuring performance, and through creating this frenzy within our organization that the customer matters and that performance matters, and it's delivering dividends, and I'm very, very pleased and happy with the results that this is producing, and I'm very, very pleased with the contribution that my excellent staff are making to ensuring that our customers have a much better experience.
And lastly, do you believe that the situation with ASR BSI and the maintaining of business that you do have with them is salvageable?
Oh, it's more than salvageable. I mean, we can ask BSI, but in my mind, at least, they are relatively satisfied with the business that we continue to do with them, i.e. the container exports of refined sugar. And as I mentioned a few times before, we will continue to look to improve that service. But I mean, I personally, I feel I have a good relationship with BSI. I mean, these are sensible people, these are intelligent people, and they make their requirements known to us, and we try to deliver against their requirements. And for me, at least, that's a very harmonious and productive business relationship that we have with BSI ASR.
And today, you said you continued the conversation on the CBA for the staff this week.
Starting on Wednesday, yes. Yes.
All right, Andy. Well, thank you for providing your perspective as the CEO of the Port of Belize on the ongoing issues that we have been seeing and hearing about.
And thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity.
With that, we're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we will be talking to BTB about a new grant program.